Sarah slowly opened her eyes. At first, her vision was blurry, but it soon cleared. She saw a doctor standing by her bed and Vida sitting beside her, looking worried. Sarah felt weak but was grateful to be alive. The doctor prescribed her medication and left, leaving Vida to stay and care for her. Vida explained that the guards had saved her after a dangerous incident, but her phone had been damaged. However, Vida had already ordered a new one for her. Even though Sarah was injured, she asked about a music room and insisted on seeing it. When she stood in front of a mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her body was covered in scars, a painful reminder of the life she was living. Sarah thought about her dream of becoming a musician, a dream that now felt far away as she remained trapped in the life of a mistress. When she entered the music room, she felt a sense of comfort. The instruments brought her rare moments of happiness. Sitting at the piano, she began to play a sad melody that reminded her of a song her late father used to sing. As she played, she softly sang, letting the music ease her pain. Her peace was interrupted when Vida told her there was a phone call. Sarah reluctantly answered and heard her friend Phydra's cheerful voice on the line. Phydra excitedly told her about a music audition happening the next day and urged her to participate. But Sarah hesitated, knowing her controlling husband wouldn't allow it. She tried to hide her struggles, but her shaky voice gave her away. Phydramentioned meeting Sarah's mother recently but added that her mother had left town. This news shocked Sarah. She couldn't imagine where her mother had gone. As Sarah wandered through the house, lost in thought, she accidentally bumped into a man. He introduced himself as Mason, her husband's colleague. Sarah exchanged polite greetings and walked away, but Mason's lingering stare made her uneasy. Deep down, Sarah knew her struggles were far from over. Zachary sat in his room, frustration boiling within him. The thought of being deceived by someone he trusted gnawed at him. He couldn't shake the suspicion that the file he received had been switched intentionally. Was it possible someone else had been given the job that was rightfully his? His thoughts were interrupted when Mason walked in, grinning smugly. Zachary didn't want company and made that clear, but Mason wasn't there to leave quickly. Instead, he brought up an entirely different subject, the mistress. Mason seemed overly impressed by Sarah, describing her as stunning and questioning Zachary about their intimate relationship. Zachary dismissed his comments with irritation, lighting a cigarette to distract himself. As their conversation shifted, Mason urged Zachary to treat Sarah better, but Zachary's indifference was obvious. He reminded Mason of the debts owed by Sarah's parents, debts that cost Sarah her freedom. To Zachary, it was a simple transaction, one he didn't feel guilty about. Mason redirected the conversation to Zachary's stepbrother, suggesting he might have had something to do with the file switch. Zachary's temper flared at the thought, vowing to kill his stepbrother if he was behind it. Mason promised to investigate and left Zachary fuming. Meanwhile, Sarah was in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of milk when she encountered Mrs. Deere, the cook. They struck up a casual conversation, but it quickly turned personal when Mrs. Deere noticed the scars on Sarah's body. Reluctantly, Sarah admitted they were Zachary's doing. Mrs. Deere warned her to avoid upsetting him further, as his anger could be deadly. Curious, Sarah asked about Zachary's family. She learned that he had a stepbrother and 2 sisters, along with a girlfriend named Mary. Mrs. Deere hinted that Mary was dangerous, advising Sarah to be cautious when she arrived. The revelation left Sarah stunned. Why would Zachary keep her as a mistress if he already had a girlfriend? Later, as Sarah passed Zachary's door, she overheard part of his conversation. He was furious, blaming not only her mother but also her late father for their actions. The cryptic remarks made her even more determined to uncover the truth about her parents' involvement in this mess. Returning to her room, Sarah made a bold decision. She called her friend Phydrae and confirmed her participation in the music contract audition the next day. No longer willing to let fear control her, she resolved to take a step toward reclaiming her dreams, even if it meant defying Zachary. Sarah sat on her bed, applying lotion after her bath. She carefully chose a red skirt and white top, completing her look with red heels. As she checked her reflection in the mirror, she was relieved to see that she had covered the scars on her body. Grabbing her phone and black bag, she stepped out of her room. Vida, her maid, was already waiting for her. Sarah told her she would be back and made her way to Zachary's room. She hesitated at the door, then knocked softly. His voice called her in, and as she stepped inside, she noticed his immaculate room. Zachary was sitting on the bed, absorbed in his phone. He looked up at her, immediately questioning why she was dressed the way she was. Sarah replied that she needed to go to the supermarket for new clothes. Zachary was firm in his response. She wasn't allowed to leave the house. Sarah, frustrated, reminded him that she wasn't his prisoner. She was his mistress, not someone who should be confined to the mansion. Despite the tension, Zachary finally relented, allowing her to go, but with 5 guards and her maid to accompany her. On her way downstairs, Sarah crossed paths with Manson, who complimented her appearance. She grew irritated and warned him not to pretend to be nice. She was aware of her position and wasn't fooled by his kindness. Once outside, she was escorted to the black car, where Vida sat beside her, painting her nails. Sarah's mind was already planning her next steps. She needed new clothes for a music contract event the next day, but she also had other goals in mind. She would stay in the mansion long enough to figure out why she was trapped there and to hold Zachary accountable. During the ride, her phone rang. It was her mother, or rather, her ex-mother. Sarah answered the call, her voice dripping with sarcasm. The conversation quickly turned hostile, with her mother insulting her. Sarah hung up, surprised at the courage she had mustered. At the supermarket, Sarah browsed the racks, looking for clothes. She picked a white lace top and checked with Vida, who confirmed it would fit. As she continued shopping, a stunning silver gown caught her eye. She was about to grab it when someone suddenly pushed her, making her stumble and fall. Looking up, she saw a woman walking away. Furious, Sarah shouted at her, but just then, a man stepped forward. He apologized for the woman's rude behavior and checked on Sarah, noticing her bleeding knee. He offered to drive her to the hospital, but Sarah hesitated. His smile made her heart race, but she remembered Zachary's guards and the risk of being watched. Reluctantly, she turned down his offer and stood up, still shaken by the encounter. Sarah politely declined the man's offer to take her to the hospital, assuring him that she was fine. His smile made her heart race, and she could feel a mix of emotions swirling inside her. She quickly left the store with Vida, who had been gathering her purchases. As they walked out, Sarah reflected on the strange encounter. Why had she asked Vida to bring her phone? Was she really losing her composure over a stranger? She couldn't understand it herself, but she didn't have time to dwell on it. Back at the mansion, Zachary was having a conversation with someone about Sarah's unexpected outing. The person asked why Zachary, who usually never let his mistresses leave the house, allowed her to go. Zachary, irritated, lit a cigarette and replied dismissively that Sarah was his mistress, and he did as he pleased. He was clearly annoyed at the sudden concern for her. Meanwhile, Phaedra, another character in the story, arrived at the manager's office for a music contract registration. She adjusted her sunglasses as she entered, and the manager greeted her. He asked if she was the one signing up, but Phaedra explained that it was a friend of hers. She then inquired about the prize for the winner, which was $3,000. Just as they were about to continue their conversation, Phaedra's phone beeped with a message. It was from Sarah. The message simply read, "I will be masked." Phaedra paused, a sense of unease creeping over her. Something didn't feel right, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this situation than she understood. When the manager asked for the name of the candidate, Phaedra said, "Sarah Ella Vector." The manager stared at her in surprise, but Phaedra dismissed it, telling him it was fine to proceed. She stepped out of the manager's office and walked to her car, still thinking about Sarah's strange message. As she stared at the phone, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She began to wonder if Sarah might actually be Zachary's new mistress. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Sarah was the new mistress. Phaedra felt betrayed, questioning why her longtime friend had hidden the truth from her. Sarah, on the other hand, had just stepped out of her car. Though she was tired, she couldn't help but feel a little happy. She had someone who made her smile, even if only for a brief moment. She walked into the house, noticing the calm atmosphere. Maybe Zachary wasn't home. Who cared? She climbed upstairs with Vida trailing behind, carrying shopping bags. Sarah sat down on her bed, feeling exhausted but also anxious about the music contract the next day. She couldn't think clearly. How would she explain everything to Zachary? She needed to prepare, but her mind felt blank. Vida, noticing Sarah's distraction, interrupted her thoughts, asking if she was okay. Sarah realized she hadn't been paying attention and responded, "Yes, I'm fine." Vida then informed her that she would go announce their presence to Zachary, who was at home. Sarah nodded and told Vida she could leave. Sarah hesitated for a moment, wondering if she should ask Vida for help in leaving without Zach noticing. But she couldn't trust her completely. What if Zach had told Vida to keep an eye on her? She sighed, just having finished her bath. She selected a pink skirt and blue sleeveless top from her closet, then sat on the bed with her singing book, trying to focus on the upcoming contract. It was 4 p.m. when Sarah walked through the hallway, still tired. As she passed by a door she hadn't noticed before, something about it caught her attention. The door was different from the others, and no one had ever entered it, not even Zachary. Curiosity took over. She couldn't resist. She walked toward the door, twisted the handle, and stepped inside.